There is a tree in the desert that held a sweetness people once trusted with their lives. Under the hard sun, its long pods hung like strings of amber beads. When you cracked one open, the air carried a scent, caramel, smoke, a faint earthiness that felt like an answer to hunger. For millennia, that sweetness was stored in clay jars, ground into cakes, carried on long journeys. Then, in the space of a few generations, it was called a weed and pushed out of the landscape. The story of that lost sweetness is a story about food, memory, and the chance to heal soil and bodies at once. This is the story of mesquite, the healing sugar we forgot about. Archaeologists in the Sonoran Desert have pulled jars from the earth with seeds inside that do not look dead at all. They look like seeds waiting. Some of these finds have been dated to thousands of years ago, kept dry and cool in the same way people in the past kept staples for a hard year. Those seeds are proof. Communities across the Southwest and northern Mexico relied on Prosopis species pods as a regular, familiar food. Indigenous groups, Tohono O'odham, Pima, Yaqui, and others, baked the pod flour into cakes, mixed it into stews, and made a sweet powder to flavor dishes. Elders speak of mesquite as part of a cycle: harvest, grind, store, share, in which the tree's pods fed people and tied them to a place. Those jars tell another truth too. They reveal intentional care, seed stewardship, and processing knowledge that allowed pods to be transformed into durable food. Mesquite flour stored well, it traveled well. That endurance of practice and seed saved people through droughts and lean seasons. Today, when archaeologists and indigenous elders talk about these finds, the conversation is about continuity. The pods in those jars are not mere relics. They are a record of relationships between people, plants, and a precarious climate. If you like rediscovered stories of nature, subscribe to Nature Lost Vault. To understand why mesquite mattered so much, we have to listen to the tree itself. Prosopis species are specialists of drylands. Beneath a modest trunk stretches a hidden architecture, roots that follow water deep into the earth, sometimes tens of feet, sometimes deeper, drawing moisture from places annual grasses cannot reach. Those roots behave like wells. They tap stores of water other plants cannot access, and in doing so change the surrounding soil. Many mesquites host bacteria in their roots that fix nitrogen from the air, returning fertility to poor soils. The canopy throws shade across the ground. Beneath that shade, temperatures drop and moisture lingers. The result is microhabitat, cooler, richer pockets where seeds germinate and small animals find refuge. This resilience is not just poetic, it is functional. Mesquite pods are carbohydrate-rich, but not in a way refined cane sugar is. A substantial portion of the pod's sugars are fructans, chains of plant sugars that pass through the upper gut and feed beneficial microbes in the colon. Scientists have begun to map what that means nutritionally. The pod contains soluble fiber, protein, and minerals like calcium. Its predictable sweetness comes with a matrix of nutrients and slow-release carbohydrates. Preliminary studies and food chemistry analyses suggest mesquite flour produces a gentler blood sugar response than refined sugar, and its fructans act as prebiotics that support gut bacteria. But this is research in progress. Language matters here. Mesquite is not a medicine. Rather, it is a food whose composition may help support stable blood sugar and gut health as part of a balanced diet. Production note: verify specific nutrient percentages and study citations before broadcast. For centuries, mesquite thrived alongside human populations. Then colonial economies arrived with new priorities. Ranching and plantation agriculture reframed landscapes in monetary terms that favored open grassland for cattle and vast fields for cotton and sugarcane. Mesquite, with its thorny limbs and dense thickets, became an obstacle. Land managers labeled it invader or brush and set about removing it with plows and fire and chemical means. In some regions, whole stands were cleared in a few decades, and with them went more than shade and pods. Without mesquite's roots and nitrogen inputs, soils became exposed and fragile. Rain that would once sink into shaded, rooted ground ran off, taking topsoil and seeds. Once stable grasslands eroded, rivers ran muddier. Landscapes that had buffered drought began to degrade. There was an irony in that clearing. In many areas, the removal of mesquite led to more erratic water cycles and poorer forage, the very outcomes that justified its eradication in the first place. Paradoxically, where mesquite was allowed to return, its presence sometimes signaled a recovery in soil structure and biodiversity. Scientists pointed to the tree's keystone role. It is not merely a food producer, but an ecosystem engineer.
As ranchers and crop farmers wrestled with diminishing yields and intensifying drought, researchers began to ask a question that had been muffled under the politics of land use. Could the tree we called a weed actually help repair the damage done when we removed it? In the latter half of the 20th century, institutions like the USDA and researchers at universities began formal studies on Prosopis species. Botanists, soil scientists, and food researchers took samples, mapped root architecture, and ran nutritional assays. They found consistent patterns. Pods contained fermentable fibers and a range of micronutrients. Soils under mesquite showed different nitrogen profiles, and replanting mesquite could alter microclimates in ways that favor seedling establishment.
Lab studies on blood sugar response to mesquite flower or extracts show promising signals of a lower glycemic response compared to pure sucrose, though trials vary in scale and design. In other words, the pieces were aligning. Mesquite offered ecological benefits and a nutritive sweetness that behaved differently in the body than refined table sugar. Still, researchers caution against treating these early findings as definitive medical claims. The language used in journals is careful. May contribute, is associated with, suggests, and the broader nutritional story must be weighed within whole diets. Meanwhile, the people who never entirely forgot mesquite quietly kept its memory alive. Indigenous elders passed on harvesting calendars, processing techniques, and recipes. In some communities, seed stewardship never stopped. In others, elders and activists began to rebuild seed banks and reintroduce old varieties into communal orchards. These revival efforts are not nostalgia. They are acts of sovereignty, reclaiming foodways, protecting genetic diversity, and reasserting a role in stewardship that colonial economies once displaced. The modern reawakening has a dozen faces. In small kitchens and artisan bakeries, chefs began experimenting with mesquite flour, praising its caramel notes and the way it gives baked goods an earthy sweetness. Health food stores introduced mesquite powder and sweeteners to customers, seeking alternatives to refined sugars. At the same time, indigenous-led initiatives focused not on commodifying a resource, but on ensuring control and fair benefit sharing. Seed banks emerged to protect diverse Prosopis varieties, and community workshops taught young people how to harvest pods sustainably and mill them into flour. The tension here is real. When a traditional plant becomes fashionable, demand can outstrip the capacity of local stewards. Equity questions arise. Who profits? Who owns the seed? And those are questions revival movements insist must be part of any scaling strategy. The story does not end in the Southwest. Similar lessons are playing out around the world. In parts of Mexico, NGOs and community groups are experimenting with replanting Prosopis to stabilize soils in degraded rangelands. International agencies have flagged drought-tolerant trees like mesquite as tools for restoring arid and semi-arid areas. Programs in countries as different as Argentina, India, and Kenya have investigated Prosopis species for fodder, fuelwood, and soil rehabilitation, always with local contexts and concerns shaping approaches. Where climates are shifting and rainfall becomes less predictable, the idea of integrating resilient, multi-purpose trees into food systems is gaining traction, but it is never a simple technical fix. Restoring ecology means restoring social systems, seed rights, land access, local knowledge, and markets that reflect the priorities of people who live there.
That is why a quiet revolution in kitchens and community gardens matters as much as scientific papers. When elders teach children how to collect pods without harming trees, they are passing on stewardship. When a chef works with a community co-op to source flour and pays a fair price, they are creating pathways for livelihoods that respect heritage. When a restoration project partners with local seed banks, it avoids the trap of outside actors imposing monocultures under the guise of solutions. This combination of science, culture, and ethics is the only way the healing potential of mesquite can be scaled without repeating old harms. What then do we mean by healing sugar? The phrase is meant to reframe sweetness itself. For most of modern history, sweetness in many parts of the world has been tied to refined cane or beet sugar, calories that spike blood glucose and strip away context. Mesquite sweetness is different. It arrives in a fibrous package with minerals and complex carbohydrates. It feeds microbes in the gut, and it grows in trees that restore soil and shade the land. Healing in this sense is not a promise of cure, but a coupling of ecological restoration and nutritional well-being. It is the idea that what we choose to sweeten our food with can either deepen extraction or repair a system. There are practical ways that communities and consumers can support this repair without romanticizing or appropriating a tradition. Supporting indigenous seed banks and restoration efforts is one. Choosing to buy mesquite products that are certified or traceable to community co-ops is another. Restaurateurs and home cooks can prioritize ethical sourcing and learn about the cultural protocols that guide harvest.
Scientists and funders can back research that fills knowledge gaps, rigorous clinical trials about glycemic impact, long-term ecological studies on soil recovery, and participatory projects that center indigenous leadership. Recovery is already happening in pockets, orchards of mesquite being tended by young stewards, local markets selling small-batch mesquite flour, reforestation projects that layer trees and grasses to rebuild soil. Each of these actions is a step away from the story of erasure and toward a different future, one in which sweetness is both nourishing and restorative. If there is a lesson here, it is a modest one. We are not discovering a magic cure. We are uncovering a pattern that was once obvious to people who lived with these trees. Foods can be part of ecology, and ecology can be part of food. Mesquite offers a model, a reminder that resilience can begin with what we plant, how we harvest, and who we include at the table. Share this story and check the description to learn how to support indigenous seed banks or local restoration projects working with Prosopis species.
The healing sugar is not a single product to be mined from the land and sold, nor is it a cure-all. It is a lesson that sometimes what heals the soil also heals what's on our plates. Remembering mesquite is an act of repair for landscapes, for cultures, and for the ways we think about sweetness itself.